let's talk about Stormfront by Jim Butcher, the first in the Dresden Files, which is a long, I think nearly 20 book urban fantasy series. Harry Dresden is a detective wizard in Chicago. This was Butcher's first published novel rather, from 2000. And it's got hints of noir, it's got sort of some mystery elements, it's got urban fantasy. It's got a bit of Western in it. I don't already say that. It's fun. It's a good book. I enjoyed it a lot. I think urban fantasy is an interesting genre. I'll probably make a video on it like I did on Mars as an element in fiction last year. I think urban fantasy, though there are some very good British examples, Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich, which I'll mention, I think, probably at some point in this review. It's a fundamentally American idea. I'm reading it because it was on my list. I've owned it for a little bit, and in my Discord book group, we're reading Wizard of the Pigeons by Robin Hobb, Megan Lindholm, which is seen as a very important early urban fantasy book. And I think the haunted city, the city with sort of magic in the back streets, the down, in those cases being on the edge, as here, or being homeless, as in Neverwhere, or which is albeit British, or Wizard of the Pigeons. These ideas of kind of the old forgotten cities, and also the contrast with, and in some urban fantasy at least, with suburbia. And it comes, I think, as someone said in our discussion, from a suburban context. It comes from American suburbia and the dream of the city, or the kind of back and forth experience of the city from those in suburbia or the country. And you get that here with this melding of American myths. You see him with his 10-gallon hat and duster. He's a cowboy. He's also Humphrey Bogart. This is aiming to be a Dashiell Hammett novel. It's aiming to have Bogey as its star. There was that series in the early noughties. I watched a couple of episodes and thought they were fine. Most people hated it. With the guy who played Quentin Lance from Arrow. But really, it should have been Bogey. He just died 40 years too early. It is, in a funny way, reminded me of Legend by David Gemmell, in the specific sense. It's not as good a book as that. That is a great book. But Legend has some problems with style. Gemmell, it's his debut novel. It's at times a bit flat or wooden. It has very set ways of expressing itself. But it's a great book nonetheless due to its other features. And here there's something similar. The genuine flaws were, for me, largely overwhelmed by it just being a lot of fun, by being very good, by being a novel I enjoyed. Those flaws are, some people would say there's Harry Dresden's misogyny, and there are some, it is occasionally distracting the way in which Harry Dresden is obsessed with women's appearance, not because no men ever are, and not because, no people in fiction ever are. In fact, I think that partly explains it, that this is a takeover of a noir voice in a sexy 90s context, post-Vampire the Masquerade, in a culture saturated with visualized sex. And I think it's also probably partly meant to point us to something unsatisfying in Harry's character, that this is a weakness of his. But that was less of an issue, though occasionally distracting, than two other things. One, that the voice is sometimes try-hard, not because of the objectification, which can be distracting, but just in general, it's all a bit like, and then this, like you can kind of predict the, I almost feel like flicking it open. There's some very good bits of description, by the way. But when Harry is talking of himself, or his feelings, basically the tone is just a bit flat. This is talking about a cat. He sauntered over to me and rammed one shoulder playfully against my knee. I wavered, recovered my balance, and unlocked the door. Mr., as was his just due, entered before I did. It's just a slightly flat style. You can see there's meant to be a playful tone, especially there where you've got actually a noir phrasing about someone coming in, but it's about his cat. But it's just not quite there. The second thing is the plot. The plot is basically that Harry's always on the edge. He's always on the edge of bankruptcy, and he gets private hires, but he also gets hired by the police for their disreputable Special Investigations Division led by his friend, obvious love interest in some sense, Lieutenant Karen Murphy. And he gets a job from each. He gets a private job for looking for a missing husband, and he gets a police job over murders, magical murders, exploded chests, but probably associated with the mob, with the mundane mob, Gentleman Johnny Marconi. And, Harry's investigating these. And I think the plot is fun and it's effective and it comes to a good conclusion, an interesting conclusion. But it's all a little bit obvious. There's very little mystery. Once you're a third of the way, maybe halfway through, the outlines of the mystery are clear. Roughly what's going to happen is clear. What must connect up is, you don't all know all the connections, but you can see it. And I think plot elements then get rammed in, particularly too with conflict. Harry and Karen, and he's the contractor who goes his own way. She's the cop, and Morgan from the White Council, the body of good wizards, but where Morgan is his guardian, who's basically waiting to execute him at any excuse because he once killed someone in self-defense, so he's on probation. And you're like, he's not going to die because it's called the Dresden Files. It's not going to happen. So come on, ram it less in our face. This is not a spoiler because there are like 20 books, right? He doesn't die and stay dead. It's not like that's the end of the series. Morgan doesn't execute him and you're like, good, got rid of that bad wizard. It's a dumb plot point and element, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't really, it's something where you can see just these missteps stylistically and structurally of a relatively, this was, I think, maybe his fifth novel, but his first published. The first one he thought was good as well. Just a bit amateurish. However, the world, the vibe, the kind of sense of the magic, which is somewhat soft but has these hard elements of these are rules, or this is how this works, or this is how we find out about this. You get introduced into it, and there's a vibe there of something like Buffy. The archetypal TV urban fantasy, really, with and that, of course, very much playing on suburbia being this strange and dangerous dark mirror to urban decay. The X-Files does similar stuff, actually. The X-Files, of course, definitely goes into urban fantasy in some episodes. So, the world is interesting. The tone and vibe for all the stylistic issues is really fun. It's a good choice. It compares, the character Harry compares favourably to me. I've read a lot more Peter Grant, but there's obviously more going on for Harry than for Peter Grant in Rivers of London. I like Peter Grant, but Harry, I think because he's blending those myths, he's blending the private dick and the cowboy, and the kind of modern, precarious, urban liver inhabitant. I think there's just this kind of there's stuff to him, and Butcher gets across well the way in which he's that guy who, he's just out for a buck, he's just trying to make money, but really he knows what's right and wrong, he knows when he's got to stand. That trope, and that is thing which doesn't descend to cliche but ascends to the trope fulfilled, and I think he's very good there. I think, and the tone and vibe about the cases, the murders that he's dealing with, this domestic situation he's dealing with, are really effective and good. I think they are very successful. You do feel foreboding and discomfort. And I think the action is great. He's great at action. So there's all these world-building things that are good. There's this general tone that's good. It's efficient. It's just over 300 pages. It means it's not super deep, but there's a bit of depth to it. It's fun. Harry is a good character. The backing cast in this, so you've got Karen and Carmichael, or Murphy and Carmichael, the cops. You've got the people who are hiring him in different situations, involved in the case. You've got Susan Rodriguez, the reporter, who she was okay. You have Gentleman Johnny Marconi. He's a pretty effective character, not necessarily somewhat clumsily used at points. And then Mac, the guy who runs this bar for people on the edge of the magical world. He was about as good as anything. Bob the Skull, he's okay. But yeah, I liked Mac, kind of like Susan Rodriguez. Murphy could grow on me, but I'm not so sure here. it was a decent book. It was a good book, I should say. With those flaws, it was never going to be a classic, but I think there's enough fun going on and there's enough happening for it to be well worth your time if you're into that kind of thing. I know many of you have read it, so tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.